You won't believe the lengths some people will go just to control their neighborhood. What started as a petty HOA dispute turned into a full-blown criminal act. Before we dive into today's story, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe so we can keep bringing you amazing stories like this one. I had just moved into what I thought would be a peaceful, upscale neighborhood. A suburban paradise with manicured lawns, friendly families, and a sense of quiet sophistication. The houses were large, but not ostentatious, designed with a mix of modern and colonial architecture. The streets were lined with perfectly pruned trees, and everything about the area screamed exclusive, but in a way that felt welcoming rather than intimidating. It was exactly what I was looking for, a safe and comfortable place to live while working long hours as a federal prosecutor. However, there was one catch: the Homeowners Association, HOA. I had been vaguely aware of its existence before buying the house, but my real estate agent assured me that membership was not mandatory. That was all I needed to hear. I had no interest in dealing with a group of self-important busybodies dictating how I could decorate my home or what kind of mailbox I was allowed to have. Unfortunately, I soon learned that the HOA president, a woman named Karen, saw things differently. Karen introduced herself within hours of my moving truck arriving. She was a woman in her mid-50s with an artificially tanned face, a stiff blonde bob, and an air of entitlement that practically oozed from her pores. She approached me with a clipboard in hand, flanked by two other HOA board members who I would later learn were just as insufferable as she was. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, though her tone carried an undercurrent of scrutiny rather than warmth. "I'm Karen, the president of our wonderful HOA. We run a tight ship around here, which is why our community is so beautiful and desirable. I assume you've already received our HOA guidelines." She handed me a thick binder that had to be at least 200 pages long. I took it politely, but my disinterest must have been obvious because her smile faltered slightly. "I appreciate it, but I won't be joining the HOA," I said simply. I was informed that it's optional, and I prefer to keep things simple. Karen's expression immediately shifted from fake friendly to barely concealed irritation. The two men behind her exchanged a look, but said nothing. "Well, I suppose it's technically optional," she admitted with a tight-lipped smile. "But you'll find that everyone in this community follows HOA rules. It's what keeps our neighborhood so harmonious." I nodded, not engaging further. I had dealt with plenty of manipulative personalities in my line of work, and I knew better than to be pulled into an argument with someone who was clearly used to getting her way. From that moment, I became public enemy number one in Karen's eyes. At first, the pushback was subtle. It started with little notes left on my door, passive-aggressive reminders about HOA expectations. One note informed me that my garbage cans weren't the approved style and needed to be replaced. Another warned me that my front lawn was non-compliant because I hadn't used their preferred fertilizer brand. I ignored them, of course. I had zero obligation to follow their ridiculous rules. Then the fines started showing up in my mailbox. A $50 penalty for unauthorized parking because my car was parked in my driveway instead of inside my garage. A $75 fine for non-standard curtains, even though they were just plain white. A $100 citation for leaving my porch light on too late, which was absurd because I often worked late hours and wanted my home to be well lit when I arrived. Each time, I politely but firmly sent the fines back with a legal note stating I was not an HOA member and therefore not subject to their rules. That seemed to enrage Karen further. One afternoon, I came home to find Karen standing in my yard, talking to a landscaper. The man looked uncomfortable as she pointed aggressively at my grass. "What's going on here?" I asked, stepping out of my car. Karen turned to me, her expression smug. "Your lawn is an eyesore," she said bluntly. I took the liberty of hiring one of our approved landscapers to fix it. I folded my arms. "You didn't ask for my permission." She scoffed. "This is a community matter. Your yard affects everyone's property values. I assumed you'd want to be a good neighbor." I turned to the landscaper. "Sir, you're not authorized to do any work here. Please leave." The man, clearly not wanting to get involved, nodded apologetically and packed up his equipment. Karen's face turned a shade of red that I was sure wasn't from her spray tan. "You're making this very difficult," she hissed. I raised an eyebrow. "No, I'm just asserting my legal rights." That's when I saw it. The first glimpse of real malice in her eyes. Up until then, I thought she was just an overzealous control freak. But now I saw something worse. The harassment escalated from there. A few days later, I noticed my mail was going missing. Then my trash bins mysteriously disappeared. One morning, I came outside to find that someone had poured an unknown liquid on my windshield, leaving streaks that wouldn't come off no matter how much I scrubbed. But the worst incident happened when I received a fake violation letter from the city. It looked official, stating that I had 72 hours to repaint my house due to a code infraction. But something fell off about it. The wording was too aggressive, and there was no proper contact information listed. So I did what any prosecutor would do. I investigated. A quick call to the city confirmed what I suspected. The letter was fake. Someone had gone through the trouble of printing an official-looking document just to intimidate me. And I had a very strong suspicion about who was behind it. I decided enough was enough. Instead of reacting emotionally, I did what I did best. I built a case. I started documenting every violation, every fake fine, every suspicious incident. I set up cameras around my property to catch any trespassers. If Karen wanted a war, she was about to get one. But before I could take legal action, she escalated things beyond my imagination. And this time, she went too far. I had dealt with criminals of all kinds in my career as a federal prosecutor. Embezzlers, drug lords, violent offenders. But nothing prepared me for the sheer pettiness and malevolence of an HOA tyrant who didn't get her way. Karen had already tried harassment, intimidation, and outright fraud to pressure me into compliance, but none of it worked. I wasn't backing down, and that seemed to make her lose all sense of reason. I suspected she was behind the fake city violation letter, but without direct proof, I couldn't legally act on it. Still, I took steps to protect myself. I installed security cameras around my property, changed the locks, and even asked a friend from law enforcement to occasionally drive by my house while on patrol. Then, the real attack came. It was a quiet Friday night, and I had finally finished up a brutal week of court cases. I decided to relax with a glass of whiskey, catching up on some reading before heading to bed. The house was still, the streets outside calm. But at exactly 1:37 a.m., my phone buzzed with an alert from my security system. Motion detected. Driveway. I immediately sat up, my heart pounding. I had installed motion-activated cameras just weeks earlier, and this was the first real alert I'd received since setting them up. I grabbed my phone and opened the live feed. That's when I saw her. Karen. She was standing in my driveway, wearing dark clothes, her hair pulled back into a ponytail. In her hands, she held a red gas can. My stomach dropped. I zoomed in, my breath catching as I saw her walking toward my car, a black BMW that was parked just outside my garage. And then, before I could even process what I was seeing, she began pouring gasoline all over the hood. For a moment, I froze, my brain struggling to comprehend the level of insanity unfolding in real time. But then my instincts kicked in. I grabbed my gun from the drawer, licensed and legally owned, of course, and bolted toward the front door. At the same time, I hit 911 on my phone, speaking quickly and calmly. I need officers at my address immediately. I have live security footage of someone attempting to commit arson. Suspect is female, mid-50s, blonde, currently pouring gasoline on my vehicle. I am armed, but will not engage unless absolutely necessary. The dispatcher responded with urgency, confirming that officers were en route. But Karen had no idea that help was already on the way. By the time I threw open my front door, Karen was fumbling with a lighter, her hands shaking as she tried to spark a flame. I saw the small flicker of light as she managed to ignite it, holding the tiny flame dangerously close to the gasoline-soaked surface of my car. "Karen, drop it!" I barked, leveling my gun at the ground near her feet, not aiming at her, but enough to make it clear that I wasn't playing around. She startled, whipping her head toward me, her eyes wide with guilt and panic. The lighter trembled in her fingers, the small flame dancing inches away from causing a deadly explosion. "This is private property," I continued, my voice calm but firm. You're trespassing, and you're about to commit felony arson. I strongly suggest you put that lighter down." For a second, I thought she might listen to reason. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then, whether out of sheer panic or a last-ditch act of defiance, she threw the lighter. My stomach lurched. Everything slowed down in that instant. I watched as the tiny flame left her fingertips, tumbling through the air toward my gasoline-soaked vehicle. Time felt frozen, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios. If the gas ignited, it wouldn't just take out my car, it could spread to my garage, my house, maybe even my neighbors' homes. But Karen had terrible aim. The lighter missed the main gasoline puddle and instead landed just short of my car's front tire. The flames sputtered out on impact. She had been seconds away from a full-scale disaster, and she failed. That's when I heard it. The sirens. Red and blue lights flashed as two police cruisers sped onto my street, stopping abruptly in front of my house. Officers poured out, guns drawn, barking commands. "Hands up! Step away from the vehicle." Karen froze, her face contorted in a mixture of rage and panic. She whirled toward me, as if somehow I was the villain in this situation. "You set me up!" she shrieked, as if she couldn't comprehend that her own actions had led to this moment. I just shook my head. "No, Karen, you did this to yourself." One officer moved forward, swiftly grabbing Karen's wrists and pulling them behind her back. The familiar click of handcuffs echoed through the night. "You're under arrest for attempted arson, trespassing, and reckless endangerment," the officer stated firmly. Karen sputtered, struggling against the cuffs. "This is a mistake. I run this neighborhood. He's the problem. He won't follow the HOA rules." That's when I saw the realization dawn on her face. Because the officers, as part of protocol, had asked for my identification. And when I handed it over, Karen's eyes went wide as she read my title out loud. "Federal Prosecutor?" Her mouth hung open, her skin turning pale. She finally understood what she had done. She hadn't just tried to burn the car of some random neighbor. She had just committed a felony against a federal prosecutor. As Karen was placed in the back of the squad car, I turned to one of the officers, a sergeant I had worked with on previous cases. "She's going to claim this was some misunderstanding," I told him. He nodded, already taking notes. "Good thing we have security footage, then." I handed over my phone, showing them the crystal-clear footage of Karen walking up to my driveway, pouring gasoline, and attempting to light the car on fire. It was ironclad evidence. She was going to jail, and there was no way out of it. As the officers drove away, I watched Karen's face in the back seat. The reality of her situation was finally sinking in. This wasn't just some petty neighborhood dispute anymore. She had just ruined her life. The night Karen was arrested felt surreal. I stood in my driveway, watching the police car disappear down the street, taking her with it. The smell of gasoline still lingered in the air, my car glistening under the streetlights, slick with fuel that never had the chance to ignite. My heart was still pounding, adrenaline rushing through my veins as I took a deep breath and tried to process everything. I had prosecuted hundreds of cases, stood in courtrooms facing hardened criminals, but somehow, nothing had prepared me for dealing with a suburban tyrant who had pushed things this far. The officers on the scene stayed behind for a bit, collecting evidence and asking additional questions. I showed them the security footage once more, this time transferring copies to them, so they could submit it into evidence. The lead officer, Sergeant Daniels, shook his head as he watched the video. "She really thought she'd get away with this?" he muttered. "People like her always do," I replied. "HOA power trips have a way of convincing certain people that they're untouchable." He let out a low whistle and closed his notepad. "Well, she's about to get a reality check. She won't be going home anytime soon." The next few days were chaotic. News spread through the neighborhood like wildfire, and suddenly, I wasn't the outcast who refused to follow Karen's absurd rules. I was the man who had exposed her for what she truly was. Neighbors who had previously ignored or avoided me were suddenly eager to talk, either to share their own horror stories about Karen or to express their shock over what had happened. Apparently, I wasn't the only one she had harassed. Over the years, she had bullied homeowners into making expensive, unnecessary renovations, fined people for minor infractions that weren't even in the HOA bylaws, and even attempted to evict a family for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. No one had ever fought back the way I had, and now that she had been arrested, people were ready to turn on her completely. Her downfall wasn't just in the hands of the police. It was happening right here in the neighborhood, and I had a front row seat. The HOA board held an emergency meeting within 48 hours of her arrest. Several members resigned, distancing themselves from Karen as fast as they could. Others called for a complete restructuring of the association, hoping to rid it of her toxic influence. By the end of the week, Karen had officially been removed as HOA president. The power she had wielded for years was gone in an instant, stripped away by her own arrogance. But that was just the beginning of her troubles. Because I was a federal prosecutor, Karen's case wasn't going to be handled lightly. Attempted arson was a serious felony, and given that she had targeted a federal employee, things were looking grim for her. I didn't even have to push for harsh charges. The evidence was overwhelming, and the prosecution was ready to make an example out of her. She was denied bail, which meant she had to sit in a jail cell while awaiting trial, something I was sure she never imagined happening to her. The woman who once ruled over the neighborhood with an iron fist was now powerless, reduced to nothing more than an inmate waiting for her day in court. When the trial finally arrived, Karen tried everything to spin the situation in her favor. She hired an expensive lawyer who argued that she had been under emotional distress, that she had acted impulsively, that she had no real intention of burning my car. But the security footage destroyed any chance of a sympathetic defense. There was no denying what she had done. The jury saw her walking up to my car, saw her pouring the gasoline, saw her fumbling with the lighter. There was no reasonable explanation for her actions other than pure malice. I sat in the courtroom, watching as the verdict was read. Guilty, attempted arson, trespassing, reckless endangerment. The list went on. Karen's face crumpled as the reality sank in. She wasn't going home after this. She was going to prison. The judge handed down a sentence of 5 years, more than I had expected, but completely justified given her actions. Karen broke down in tears, begging for leniency, but there was none to be had. The moment she had flicked that lighter, she had sealed her fate. Even after the trial ended, the consequences of her actions rippled through her life. Her reputation was destroyed, not just in our neighborhood, but beyond. News outlets had picked up the story of the HOA president turned arsonist, and it spread far beyond our little suburban community. People who had once admired her for running a tight ship now saw her for the dangerous control freak she really was. Her family distanced themselves from her, embarrassed by what she had done. Her name became synonymous with HOA corruption, a cautionary tale about what happens when power goes unchecked. Meanwhile, the neighborhood underwent a transformation. Without Karen at the helm, the HOA underwent major reforms. The ridiculous fines disappeared. The unfair rules were abolished. Homeowners finally had a say in how their properties were managed. It was no longer a dictatorship. It became a community again. I had no desire to be part of the HOA, but I was relieved to see it shift into something more reasonable, something that no longer existed to feed one person's ego. As for me, life moved on. My car was professionally cleaned and restored, though I eventually traded it in for a new one. Too many bad memories attached to it. My house remained mine, untouched by Karen's reign of terror. And though I was never the type to be overly friendly with neighbors, I found myself getting along with them more after everything that had happened. They respected me now, not just as a homeowner, but as the person who had finally taken down the tyrant who had ruled over them for too long. One evening, months after Karen had been sentenced, I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the quiet of the night, when one of my neighbors, an older man named Bill, walked up with a beer in hand. "Never thought I'd say this," he said with a chuckle, handing me the drink, "but I'm glad you moved in." I took the beer, clinking it against his. "Me too," I admitted. Karen had thought she could bully me into submission, that she could control me the way she had controlled everyone else. But she had underestimated me. She thought I was just another homeowner who would cave under pressure. She never realized that I was the one person she never should have messed with.